Today's daf is Kuf Ches, and we had to stop a little abruptly. I apologize on Kuf Zayin Amud Beis yesterday. So let me just summarize the last thing that we were learning, and we stopped in the middle, sort of. The Mishnah had told us that if a person doesn't know, he doesn't remember whether his pledge was for a par, a bull, which is a much more expensive animal than an egel, than a calf, then he's got to bring both. So the Gemara says, why does he have to bring both? He only pledged one of the two, and if he brings the bull, then that would certainly cover him for the calf insofar as it's so much more expensive. And the Gemara says that this Mishnah must be reflecting the Shita of Rebbe, who holds that you can't bring a gadol for a katan, meaning if you pledged for a katan, then we don't apply the universal principle of yesh bechal masayim mana, that 200 includes 100, but rather he has to bring exactly what he pledged, in this case a katan. But the Gemara objects to this because the Mishnah doesn't seem to reflect the Shita of Rebbe, because a little bit later in the Mishnah, what the Gemara calls the Seifa, the Shita the Chacham is quoted, and the Chachamim say that if he pledged a katan, he certainly could bring a gadol. So the Gemara says, are you going to tell me that the Mishnah should be cut up into pieces, and it starts with the Shita of Rebbe, goes on to the Shita of the Chachamim, and then at the end swings back to the Shita of Rebbe, and the Gemara says, that's exactly what we're going to say, Reisha v'Seifa Rebbe, and Mitziasa Rabbanon. So it means that in the middle part of the Mishnah is saying that this issue, which according to the Reisha, Rebbe had committed to the fact that you can't bring a larger animal for a smaller animal, that is subject to a controversy. And the Rabbanan say that you can. So we're going to start with Tnan Hossam, which is approximately 10 lines up from the bottom of Kuf Zayin Amud Beis. And we're quoting a Mishnah now in Shkolin. And the Mishnah says that there are 13 different shofros. The shofros were kind of boxes for the collection of funds. And the shape was similar to that of a shofar. And there were new shkolim, and then there were, in addition to the 7 new shkolim, there were 6 what we call shkolim for nedavos, for donations. And the Gemara wants to know, what was the purpose of these 6 shofros for donations, shishol and nedava keneged me? What was their purpose? And the Gemara is going to bring one opinion after the other, then try to analyze why each opinion rejected the other opinion. The first opinion is that of Chizkiah. Chizkiah keneged shisha bate avos hakohanim. We know that the Kohanim were divided up into mishmaros, and there were 24 mishmaros. Each mishmar was comprised of bate avos, of different families of Kohanim. And they divvied up the service in the Mikdash in such a way that each one of the mishmaros would get a week of service in the Mikdash for the first half of the year, and in the second 6 months of the year would get another week. And within each mishmar, as we said before, they would subdivide it into the Batei Avos. And Chizkiah claims that because of the existence of donated pledges for karbanos, there would be a certain kind of built-in chashash of friction. Why? Because in the case of nedavos, the mishmar that's in charge, or the Beis Av that's in charge of a week in which there are a lot of nidavos, they serve to lose out on what's called the oros, the hides of the karbanos, meaning let's divide it up, we'll call it A and B. So you have Beis Av A and Beis Av B. If it turns out that during the week of Beis Av A, there's an increment, a larger amount of nidavos, then they're going to lose out on many of the karbanos of chova, which Beis Av B will be able to bring those karbanos and will be able to get the hides. Apparently, the hides, I get the impression, was worth, the Kohanim didn't have a great deal of income. They may have gotten truma here and there, trumas meiser, but they didn't really have that much. I mean, they could eat from a certain karbanos, so it was very lucrative for them to get the hides and sell it on the market. And therefore, this situation could lead to discord between the Batei Avos. The ones who had no opportunity to bring donated offerings, meaning nedavos, they would have a grievance against their fellow Kohanim who received all of the hides. So again, this has to do with Karbanos Yachid and Karbanos of the Rav, and Rashi goes into great detail here. Anyway, that's Chizkiah. So Chizkiah says that the number 6 was chosen to correspond to the Batei Avos and the possible friction or disunity or discord between the various Batei Avos. And Tiknu Lem Chachamim Sheyehei Shalom Zem Zeh. So the Rabbanan made these boxes, 6 in number, for collecting, the funds for Karbanos Tzibur or Olas Nedava, in order to sort of tell the people, be satisfied with what you have to do during the week that you have to serve. And, everything that a person should get in life was allotted to him in a shamayim. Anyway, Rav Yochanan Amar, mitoch shanedova meruba, tiknu lehem shofaros merubim, kidei shelo yisapshu amos. Right, so when you have a surplus of money, like let's say, for example, you donated X amount of money for carbon Y, and then by the time you get around to be makriv that carbon that you pledged, the value on the market of those animals went down, and therefore you have a surplus of money. Well, there's going to be a lot of money of donations, and if we put them all into one shofar, then the money, because of the metal element of the money, will cause ipush. Ipush means the money corrodes. So we want to separate them into various shofros, so there won't be an overabundance of metal coins in one particular shofar. Zeiri Omer has another explanation. Kengeged par, egel, ayil, keves, gedi, v'soir. So these are 6 different types of animals: a bull, a calf, a ram, a lamb, a kid, and a goat. And those shofros would serve different purposes. So, for example, if a person took a neder to bring a par as an olah, he would deposit a mana, which we said was 100 dinar, and we mentioned that in the Mishnah. And then the shofar had the title of a par. If he vowed to bring an egel, which is worth 5 sloim, he would deposit it in a shofar called an egel. That's what they wrote on the outside of the shofar, and so forth and so on. Then the Kohen would take the money from the shofar entitled par and would bring olos of parim. And that's what they would do with all the other shofros. However, the Gemara points out that Zeiri's interpretation of the number 6 for shofros is contingent on accepting Rebbe, the Omer Katan Vehevi Gorolo Yotza, meaning if we hold like the Rabbanon that Yesh B'chal Masai Mona, that you could give a larger amount than that which you pledged, then you could, in reality, put all the funds into one shofar and collect the mana, which is the value 100 dinar for a bull, and that would cover him for any other carbon. No need to separate them. But we're accepting the shita of Rebbe, and Rebbe holds that you have to bring the katan, and you can't be yotze with a gadol. So each one of these 6 types of animals have to have their own shofar. Barpada Omar, can I get a parim ve'ha'elim? Okay, so this has to do with a case of a par heling dover shel tzivur, which is brought, as we said many times, both here and in Zvachim, when the tzibur violated an erroneous ruling of the Bezna Gadol. So you have to bring Ifrova tzibur, then you have to bring a par heling dover shel tzibur. Then you have elim that are brought as karbanos asham. An asham would be an obligation generated either by theft or robbery or any of the other kinds of me'ilah. And if, let's say, they designated a certain par for the par helim dov shel tzibur, or, for example, a certain ayal for the asham me'ilah or the asham gzelos, and then it got lost, then what happens is that if they find the original one that got lost, after replacing it with a replacement, they have to put that money into a pot, so to speak, meaning into a shofar, and it's designated to buy carbon ola on behalf of the tzibur. So, for example, in Me'ilah, one unintentionally benefited from Hegdesh. He now has to bring, besides paying an extra chomesh, he has to bring a carbon asham. Or if he denied a monetary claim and he took a shvur to that effect, he's required, if he admits his guilt, to pay plus add a fine of 20% and bring a carbon asham. That's called an asham gzelos. If these were lost and later recovered, they are sold. But here we need to what's called motziim l'reya, meaning we put them out in a grazing area until they get a blemish. And once they get a blemish, then psuli hamikdashim of balimum can be redeemed. Vakvasim. This is now we're starting kuf ches.